Welcome to Combine to Async Part 2. In this video, we'll look at notifications. Last time we began with an observable object that communicated changes to a SwiftUI view using @published and combine. By the end, we'd removed combine and @published from the communication between the two objects, and just use combine and @published within the observable object, which we could just then make some object. This time our goal is to get rid of the combine and @published used within our object. But then how will we communicate from some object to our SwiftUI view? We'll use a notification center to do so. Usually you use the notification center to communicate between objects. In our case, we'll just use the notification center within our view model. Also, I have an update since the last video. Remember I told you combine is going away? And I pointed to this pitch on Swift forums. Well, combine is still going away, but that pitch has now become a proposal. You can check out the Swift Evolution Proposal 395 called Observation to get all the details, and I'm sure there'll be updates to SwiftUI to work with Observation that will be announced at DubDub this year. All right, let's begin where we left off last time. Our view model was called Support, and it used combine and @published here to create a publisher of ints that we later used inside of an async sequence to feed the main view. As a first step, let's change what the next button does and not set the counter from a random variable directly. Instead, we're going to post a notification. To do so, we're going to need to import Foundation. And for convenience, let's create a notification name constant. And now we can post a notification with that name. This instance of support will be the object posting the notification. And we're also going to have a user info dictionary, so let's create a constant for our key. And we'll post our random integer as the entry in the user info dictionary with the key counter key. When you're learning async coding, it's important that we distinguish that there's absolutely no async communication going on in this direction. When we post a notification, that's done at a specific time synchronously. We aren't receiving notifications, so that means we aren't using or updating counter and therefore numbers. And so if you run the application, even though we're choosing a new random number and we're posting that notification, you're not seeing any effect on the screen. In an extension for support, let's go ahead and register for notifications. And so we'll use Notification Center default and add an observer. There are two ways of doing this. We'll use the old-fashioned way and start by using the selector version. That requires that we have some method that we're going to call back, and it must be an @obc method that takes a notification as its argument. And now we can provide the name of that method using #selector. If I could afford a high-tech effect, you could imagine a swirling, switching thing that grows and takes over the screen, and when it disappears again, we've got the other version of @observer, the one that is block-based, or for Swift programmers, the closure-based one. We take the body of that method we used to call back, and it is now the contents of the closure for this @observer version. When we use this version, we should handle a token that tells the notification center when we're not interested anymore, but I'm going to ignore that detail and keep the code simple because it's going to be removed anyway. So what should we do in this closure? This closure is executed every time we receive our notification. So the first thing we can do is look to see, does this notification have a user info dictionary? And if it does the user info dictionary contain a value for the key counter key? And while we're here, I like to check that that value is an integer. If it is, let's set our counter property to this number we've pulled out of our notifications user info dictionary. Run the app. It should work. Oops. We forgot to call the register for notification method. Add an init for support and call register for notifications there. Now run the app. Everything works as it did last time. Every time you tap the next button, you get a new random number between 1 and 50 surrounded by a circle. We're going to replace this way of listening for notifications. One of the cool things that Apple has done over the years is it took our old-fashioned approach, and when we got Grand Central Dispatch and block-based programming, it gave us that second version. When they introduced Combine, we got a publisher for notifications. And now that we have Async, they've introduced an async sequence version of notifications. I warn you that things are going to break along the way, so let's start by breaking things deliberately. Let's get rid of our published property counter. This will break two things. Down in register for notifications, we can't set self.counter equals counter because self.counter doesn't exist anymore. And I no longer have a publisher of ints named $counter, so that has to go. And once that's gone, I might as well remove combine. And so we've removed combine and @published. Those are the things we broke within support, but main view is now broken also because there's no numbers. We'll come back to that later. I'm no longer going to register for notifications inside of support because we're going to remove register for notifications in a moment. And the final thing I want to do just to lighten up support a little bit is to take these two constants and move them outside of support. They are still constants available to us, but they're no longer members of support. This means we have to make a slight change to our use of counter key. Just remove the self down in register for notifications. Yes, we're going to get rid of register for notifications, but I'd prefer this compiles while we're in the process. And this brings us to the change I referred to. Notification Center now contains notifications, which is an async sequence of notifications. I mentioned that main view is broken because numbers doesn't exist, so let's add numbers back to support. And we'll start with the default Notification Center and ask it for notifications named our notification name. This is a new method on Notification Center, and it returns notifications. In other words, it returns an async sequence of notifications that never fails. As we saw last time, one of the keys of async sequence is in many ways it behaves like a sequence. So let's look at what we've done in register for notifications and see what we can do to numbers to modify it. Here's an if let userinfo equals notification.userinfo. That looks at notification.userinfo, and if it's nil, we stop, and if it's not nil, we unwrap it and assign it to userinfo. The corresponding operator for sequences is compact map, and it turns out there's a compact map for async sequence as well. And so if we do compact map and use the key path userinfo, we're doing the same thing as the if let below. We're taking every notification, and if it's not nil, extracting the user info dictionary. Let's look at the second part of the if let. First, we're looking at the user info dictionary to ensure there's a value for the key counter key. And then secondly, we're checking that its type is int. We can do that in another compact map. In fact, the body of the closure looks exactly like the right side of the equal sign below. And now numbers is an async sequence of ints that never fails, which is what main view is expecting. So now we can get rid of register for notifications. Go ahead and run the app. It runs exactly as before. And this is all there is to support. No combine, no @published. When the user taps the next button, we post a notification that contains a user info dictionary with the int we expect. On the receiving end, we start with an async sequence of notifications. We transform it into an async sequence of dictionaries, and we transform that to an async sequence of ints. And as I said before, that's exactly what main view is expecting. In this video, we've made no changes to main view. And along the way, we've removed @published and combine. It seems silly that support is posting something to the notification center and then support is receiving that notification back. Maybe there's something nicer we can do with async.